Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Candid Conversations podcast. I am the host, Dr. Michaela Word, and I am also the content creator behind the KandidKayla.com platform as a whole, which is what is producing this podcast today. Through this platform, we are all about growing ourselves, in ourselves, and for ourselves through the 8 dimensions of wellness by practically being an active participant in our relationship and with ourselves, with God, and with the people around us in order for us to ultimately pursue health every single day. And so today we are going to be talking on this podcast about how to live in the and not the or of life. So if you guys are interested, then please keep on listening. So a bit of a flow on how this podcast gets down is we always start with a prayer. I'm going to give you guys a bit of an outline, and then we're going to jump into the meat of things. So, Lord Jesus, we just thank you for today. We thank you, God, for an opportunity for us to hear from you. Lord, I ask that you would use me and that you would speak in and through me on today's podcast, that people's lives would be changed, and that I too would grow, and that everyone listening would grow from this conversation. Lord, that you would help expand our understanding and our limits, Lord, on who we think that you are, and that you would continue to show up as who you truly are in our lives. Please, again, grow us and shape us. In your mighty name I pray, amen. So, jumping into the crux of this, because the title, honey, living in the and not the or of life is so powerful. Just the title alone, but I want to talk about where this actually came from. So a bit of a flow of how this is going to go. I'm going to give you some background. I'm actually going to give a verse today, and then from that I'm going to tell you a bit about how this all kind of came together, this concept, how it related to my life, and how it can be applied to all 8 areas of our wellness, all 8 dimensions of our wellness, and ultimately, my favorite part of the show, practically how we can apply this. So, a bit of a background, let's jump in. I did a podcast before, hopefully you guys listened to it, talking about villainizing people and learning to have empathy for the villains in our stories, and realizing that through this conversation, just as a bit of a summary, you should definitely go back and listen, but as a bit of a summary, there's always this mindset of good or bad, just instinctively in our nature as individuals, especially if you have any sort of religious foundation. There's 9 times out of 10 this concept of good and bad, or good and evil. And sitting in this dichotomy, we have a tendency to villainize individuals around us, whether that be somebody who did us wrong or somebody who has hurt us. We make them a villain in an effort to make ourselves feel better. But on the opposite side, we too are often villains in people's stories and don't even realize it, or some of us who do realize it, it either affects you in one way or another. But understanding that this concept of villainizing can be very detrimental, especially in this cutoff culture that we live in nowadays. I think that it hinders us from getting true healing from offense, true healing from conflict, true resolution, because we have a tendency to just cut people off and call it boundaries and leave it at that. But I ultimately said that I think that the way that we truly heal is when we learn to coexist with people that we considered villains in our stories. Because it allows us to humanize them and to see them for who they are and to truly exercise grace. And from that, we can grow. And just kind of listening to that playback and sitting with that for quite some time, I started pulling on this thread of this idea of the and versus the or, and how we can actually live in a spirit of or and live with this theme of and over or is what I'm trying to say. And so that led me to actually, like, this verse came to mind when I was doing the podcast, and I didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want the podcast to run too long, because it was already a smooth 40 minutes easy. but I'm going to share it today. And this is going to be the fundamentals behind this conversation that we're going to have today. So the verse is Matthew 13:24 through 30. And I know that a lot of people who listen to this podcast do not consider themselves Christians, and that is perfectly fine. But here on this podcast, we use the Bible as our foundation for wisdom. And so we pull passages over here often, and so today we're going to be reading this one. So it says, Jesus told another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed seed among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, don't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. And the servants asked him, Do you want us to go and pull them up? No, he answered, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let them grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into the barn. So, Kayla, why is this so cryptic and what is it talking about? So, in this particular passage of the Bible, Jesus is speaking to a large crowd of people, and he's speaking in these parables, and he spoke in these parables, and he even talks about in this section of passage or this chapter of Matthew that he speaks in parables in an effort to give divine wisdom to those who want it, and to kind of give like medicine in candy, where it seems like it's just a cute little story, but if you dig a lot deeper, it's got some true fundamentals for life that we can pull away. And so further above in this chapter, he's talking about how we can sow seed and seeing seed as our wellness or our growth or however you want to view it. In this same way, in this passage here, we can view the actual seed that's sown as it's produced as us. And so to this point, if we are villainizing people, it says right here in this passage that we want to ensure that we are coexisting with people, because even though we consider them a villain in our life, if we are to cut them off, it hinders our growth as well. And so, let alone their growth. So I started really digging into this, and I think the biggest takeaway, not to beat a dead horse, because you can definitely go listen to that podcast, is that cutting people off stunts our growth, and living in this or mindset stunts our growth, and it stunts theirs. It hinders us from the opportunity to find true healing and growth, and not just growth, but health, like true health. I think we have a tendency to get in these cycles where someone offends us, we cut them off, we go find someone new. Someone offends us, they cut us off, and we find someone new. And in this process, we become calloused and hardened. And rather than truly healing, we end up as these shells of people that we were before, because we keep going through these same cycles of pain and heartache that I don't believe that God has ever called us to go through. And so this is why we have to be very careful when we're villainizing people, not to, number one, but number two, to grow from those experiences, because we are expected to live with them. We are expected to love our enemies, which is also biblical, and realizing that not everybody is our enemy. Sometimes we're just living in a coexistence with someone who has offended us, and we haven't healed from it. And so this idea, again, not to beat a dead horse, can actually be extended though into the rest of our lives. And this is what I wanted to talk about today. I saw an Instagram post, and it finally gave words to the season of life that I'm in, and I really feel like it's worth talking about. And so the Instagram post says, traveling the world is better than a $40,000 wedding. And this girl's response is, oh my gosh, so beautiful. It says, I'm going to do it all. That's y'all's problem. You're living in an or world, and I'm living in an and world. And for the first time, since I've been in this season, which I'll talk about in just a second, like I've spoken about how God gave me this amazing job and all of the things associated with that in previous podcasts. But for the first time, I finally had words to it. I'm living in an and world, and I feel like for so long I was living in an or world. Now coming into an and world, I want to share that with everyone. And I really feel like it's so underrated. So very underrated. Like, people have no idea what they're missing out on. So I guess a bit of my testimony and just talking about how God has brought me into this space of and. About a year ago, I finally made the decision that, hey, I'm going to graduate from getting my PhD early. And choosing to make that decision came with a lot of consequences, right? I needed to find a job. I needed to decide where I wanted to live, what kind of job I wanted, what I was going to do next, what I wanted for my life. And I think it was so many questions at once that it kind of paralyzed me a little bit. Because my whole life I've had these goals and these plans, and we talk about this all the time in wellness, how it's important for us to have goals and plans and aspirations, but we also have to work our wellness in the process. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the possibilities were endless, and I couldn't settle on one thing because the possibilities were like infinite. It's similar to like when you graduate high school or you graduate college. But for me, I always knew out of high school I wanted to go to college. And out of college, I kind of knew I wanted to go to grad school in some capacity. I just wasn't 100% sure of what that looked like. And so now for the first time, I have lived like some life, I graduated from graduate school at 25 with a PhD. And it's like, preparing for that and knowing that was coming, I was at a space where it was like, school is ending, now what? And it was in that now what that I had to do some self-discovery, a lot of praying and fasting, which I've talked about plenty of times on this podcast. But this concept of, Lord, these are all the things that I want to do. And I go and I sit down with individuals and I'm talking to them and they're saying, you're going to have to choose something because there's no way you can have it all. And to be a little more transparent, like, I was really torn between this idea of traveling full time, moving into a van and doing van life and having remote jobs and everything like that versus having the job of my dreams, making six figures. And also like this juxtaposition of like knowing that I was ready for some things, like, y'all, just as a single woman, 25, really the end of 24 going into 25, I had decided that I wanted to be married. I wanted children. And so I hadn't dated in years at this point. And so realizing I wanted to get married and I wanted kids, and that was something on the forefront of my mind. And am I going to just dedicate myself to my work again, or am I going to make space to actually get out there and start dating and meeting people again? And just all of these emotions, all of these ideas, all of these things, like, should I be a full-time entrepreneur because entrepreneurship was very important to me? Or should I actually go into my field? Should I not go into my field of study? Should I change careers altogether? Should I go back to school and get a master's on top of this PhD? Like, all of these possibilities. And I remember talking to a lot of people and everybody just being like, oh, okay, yeah, we support you. But just the look in their eyes said, this girl is crazy. And I remember sitting down and I prayed and I talked to God, and I remember him telling me, reminding me of the verse that he gave me a very long time ago, which is Psalms 37:4, which is, take delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I remember the Lord asking me, what do you want? And I was like, well, I want this and I want this, but they said I can have, only one or the other. And God said, but what do you want? If you could have anything with no limits, no boundaries, No expectations, just pure desire. What do you want? And I told him exactly what I wanted, and what I wanted was everything. I wanted it all. I wanted to live in the and. I wanted a career. I wanted a family. I wanted an outside life. I wanted to be maximizing all 8 dimensions of wellness. I wanted to travel full time while still having a job and having the flexibility to do what I wanted to do. And I just began to just tell him all the things, and living in this space where for the first time in my life, I think I finally understood that when he says in Ephesians 3:20 that he is able to do immeasurably more than we could think, ask, or imagine, I think for the first time, I couldn't fathom what I was asking God for. Like, there was no plan I could set up to make sure that this happened exactly the way that I wanted to happen. It was finally such a big ask and such a big faith ask that it's gotta be God, because there's no way I could do it myself. And as I said before, like, walking through that process of even just getting this job and this full-time position, and this full-time position being literally everything I prayed and asked God for and more, in such a way that it's 100% remote and I'm making good money in it. I'm, enjoying what I'm doing, and I'm involved with a team that's not like super heavy on me and all the things, but also I want a family one day, and this job is very heavy on the work-life balance. They ensure that we as employees have a nice work-life balance. All of this was so important to me, and now to see it just coming all into place in the way that only God can do is blowing my mind. And so not to look at God from a position of Santa Claus, but from literally the God of the universe asking you, what do you want? And you being able to say, this is what you want. I think that puts our faith in a different stratosphere. Again, not to see God for what he can do, because I really hate when we reduce God for what he can do for us, as if he's not the same person that made the stars and knows how many hairs are on our head. But I also don't like when we damage childlike faith, particularly within church spaces, because we don't individually have the faith to believe for someone. Does that make sense? So I think so often in church we have a tendency to be like, oh, that person is praying for a child, that God can do that. That's an acceptable faith ask. But if this person is saying they want to retire at 25, that's not an acceptable faith ask, because if God didn't do it for me and I've never seen God do it for anybody, well, then he can't do it for you. And I just think that that is closed-minded and putting boundaries on the God of the universe. He is not confined to our boxes. The point is that we can't fathom him. We can't wrap our mind around him in his totality lest we die. Even then, we still won't be able to. And I think that's the point. Don't limit God to what you think he can do. That's why he says in this verse that he can do immeasurably more than we can ask, think, or imagine. It's to go beyond what we could ever conceptualize. And so living this out for myself and experiencing this for myself, I realized that people literally are not living this. People are so caught up in the aura of life that they've forgotten that we serve an and God. And again, if you're not religious, how this pertains to our wellness is that we can have it all. No one ever said that we couldn't. That did it. Does that make sense? Don't let other people's lack of faith or lack of ambition for themselves hinder you from having it all, because you can surely have it all. Practically speaking, extending this concept to all the 8 dimensions of wellness. similar to coexisting with people that we have villainized and living in this and space, we can also live in an and space in other ways relationally, right? Like, I think so often, especially as a single person, people are like, you can either have healthy friendships or have a healthy dating relationship, but you can't have both. Who says? Like, but like, who really says? Is that the naysayers, the people who don't have healthy life boundaries for themselves? Or is that somebody who's like never tried? Because the powers that be, quote unquote, the theys of the world say that you can't have it. Like, no, you can have both. You can have healthy relationships. You can have healthy dating relationships, and they coexist and be perfectly fine, but it takes work. Spiritually, I think this juxtaposition between living in this world and like literally living, like truly living. I mean, like not being a monk and never leaving your house and not having friends, but like living, going out and enjoying the life that God has called you to live, and then being somebody with morals and values and standards and a moral compass. Like, they tell you that you can only be one or the other. They being church people, child, and again, the masses, the world out at large will tell you there's no way that Chick-fil-A is a good Christian organization because, you know, they segregate themselves from homosexuality and things like that politically. And then on the other hand, it's like there's no way that they're not a good Christian organization for the same reason. Well, there's a bit of duality, right? Like, first of all, stop judging people. It's not that deep. But second of all, like, you can live in this world, influence this world in the same way that Chick-fil-A does, and still hold morals, values, and standards without chastising other people and hurting other people. And I'm not saying that Chick-fil-A has ever done that. I eat at Chick-fil-A. I love Chick-fil-A. I have no idea what Chick-fil-A has done or hasn't done publicly, so don't come and crucify me. But as an example, us as individuals, when it comes to our spiritual growth, how much growth could we truly have if instead of isolating ourselves to church buildings, we actually went out and spoke to people and interacted with people that didn't agree with us politically, socially, morally, and still kept our morals and values, even though we are associating with people who aren't necessarily like us, you know, similar to Jesus. Maybe that's why Jesus was so revered, is because he was exercising growth in a way that people can't fathom even today. In the same way, I think sometimes people want us to choose between us being women, and I know there's guys that listen to my podcast, but guys too, actually, young people, singles. Like, I think a lot of times we have been conditioned by society and our parents that you can either have a successful career, successful education, all of that stuff, or you can have healthy dating relationships or a family or a spouse. And you could definitely have both. I know so many people who do have both, but because of immaturity or lack of preparedness or lack of experience on the people who raise us, so our parents' parts, a lot of times our parents say you can only have one or the other, like get your head out of the boys' butts or stop chasing after them fast tail girls and start focusing on your success. Well, you can do both, but it just requires work. Another example is, you know, when people are trying to get healthy and focus on their physical wellness, like, oh, I can't be healthy and eat good food because all good food is deep fried. And that's not true. You could do both simultaneously. Like, I am a foodie, like to the heart of me. And for so long, especially when I was like actively working on my physical wellness, like super, super hard. I had like physical goals. I wanted to look a certain way. I wouldn't eat certain foods. I had cut whole food groups out of my diet because I wanted a certain physique. But the thing is that certain physique doesn't necessarily mean I'm prioritizing my health. It just means I'm prioritizing a certain physique. And so learning to live in this balance of the and, like, I can have a nice body and eat the foods that I want to eat. I might have to work out a little more. It might cost me a little bit more, but at the end of the day, I can have both. I just have to choose to have both. The next example I have is for your financial wellness. I think a lot of times we think that, especially this new trend of like black girl luxury, that these people are spending all this money and they have no life savings. You can save money and live a life of luxury easily. And you don't have to make a lot of money to do it. You just have to use something called prioritization, where you learn to have a priority and to stick with it, to have a ranking system that puts things in order of importance. And based off of that, you can still hit all of your goals. Maybe not as fast as if you were aggressive, but nonetheless, you could still be happy and have peace of mind. So this concept of the and, living in this and seeing a fullness of life develop from this concept of the and is so important. The next example I have is environmentally. I think people think they have to spend a lot of money to be ecologically sustainable, and responsible. There is a coexisting that can definitely happen between ecological and economical wellness. It is. I mean, if we couldn't, Black people for generations wouldn't have been saving trash bags, not trash bags, grocery bags. It's the small things in our lives that can help save us. I think in the same way, environmentally, I think we think, oh, I have to have the nicest house in order for me to feel like I'm in a space that reflects me. And that too is not true. You just need to be in a space that is safe and whole. Like, I don't understand why we are taught to live in the or of that, but we can definitely live in the and. Most definitely. Similarly, mentally, I think we're taught that you're either book smart or you have common sense. Very rarely do you find someone with both. That's true, but that's because those people choose the and. I feel like I am someone who has common sense and I'm book smart. Now, if I haven't experienced something, it's a lot harder for me to maybe do something that I haven't experienced, but I have basic common sense, yes, and I have a PhD, yes, but I chose the and. I chose to have balance. And in a lot of ways, those skills have to be developed for people on either side, right? If I'm somebody who just naturally has street sense, not a lot of times they struggle with history and English and math and science and that kind of stuff. So you just put in a little bit more work and now you become a more balanced individual. In the same way, for me, school came easy, but social interactions and things like that were not as easy. And so my mom made sure that we were very well-rounded as a kid. I did sports, I did arts, I did religious type things, I did outside, like community service type stuff. And I just became a very well-rounded individual as a result of it. All of it, though, took time, work, and effort. The last example is that we can coexist. A lot of times people are like, you're either anxious or you're confident. You can't be both. You can definitely be both. I have experienced it firsthand. If I know something, I know it. But that doesn't take away the fact that I have social anxiety and I get very scared when I talk to people. Especially like doing this podcasting thing, like interacting with you guys on social media. I'm always afraid that somebody's going to take something that I've written out of context. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm terrified because I don't want to offend someone. But at the same time, I know what I know. You're coming to me because I'm clearly facilitating some sort of conversation or I'm an expert on some small thing, you know what I mean? Some small corner of the internet. So nonetheless, I think it's important that we now see, I went through all 8 dimensions of wellness, but I feel like it's important that we see that this concept extends far beyond just how we relate to other people, but how we see the world. Are you seeing your world in a spirit of and? Are you living your life from a place of and? Do you see that you can indeed have it all? Or are you limiting yourself from a place of fear, or from a place of lack of knowledge, or from a place of understanding and just choosing not wanting to do the work? I mean, whatever it is for you that is allowing you to choose the or, I'm challenging you today to try to choose the and in your life. Even if you start off with one area of your life, understand how rewarding it is when you begin to choose the and how much you will grow when you choose the and. Because sometimes choosing one or the other is not what's most beneficial for you and what you are called to do. So, practically speaking, once you've answered those questions for yourself, hopefully you come to some sort of conclusion in yourself about where in your life you would like to go from or to and. So practically, how do we choose to live in the and not the or? And I think this is where that verse comes in handy, because we can pull practical skills out of the verse and apply them to our life. So again, the verse is Matthew 13:24-30. The first thing you can do to practically choose to live in the and not the or, is to understand the cost associated with choosing the and. I say that again. Understand the cost associated with choosing the and. In verse 28, it says, the servants asked him, do you want us to go and pull them up? So understand that the naysayers or the people around you might not necessarily understand. That's the first cost. The first cost is that choosing the and is going to defy all common sense. It's going to defy the status quo. It is going to go directly against what seems to be obvious or seems to be easy. Back to my example, I could definitely have chosen, I had another job interview before taking this job, and the job interview offered more money, and on paper and in theory, it seems like it would be a much simpler job. It would have been a nicer job for me to have taken because it was more closely related to the field that I currently work in, or that I worked in graduate school. And I chose to turn that job down because they were not willing to allow me to work from home. They wanted me to move across the country. And that went against what I wanted for myself. And that is a work-life balance that allowed me to be 100% remote. And so living in this and understanding that, the people around me, I'm sure, were like, this girl is crazy. She has no money, no job. She needs to just take a job. And in some aspects, I'm sure that had I told people about this, the difference between these decisions to take that job or to not take that job because they called me first, it would have deterred me. So the first thing in understanding the cost is that it's not going to make sense to everybody. The higher salary, me taking a lower salary, makes no sense, not even to me. But I know that the flexibility of working from home full time is so much more important to me than any dollar value. And staying close to my mama, honestly, is priceless. In the same way, understanding the cost also requires you to understand some of the sacrifices that are necessary that you have to make. I mean, if you're somebody who wants a family and a career, well, that's going to take some time. You might not have as much you time. You might not have as much empty space and free time. That's what I'm looking for. You might not have as much free time because you're going to be juggling 2 full-time titles over your life, whether that be wife and boss, or boss and mother, or whatever it is, or boss and father, or however, it works for you. But there's a cost associated with it. So the first thing you need to do is know that cost. Know what it's going to take in order for you to do that. Like, if I'm dating somebody and I want healthy relationships with my friends, well, then I'm going to have to carve out some time to ensure that I can juggle both. Making sure that I'm not being negligent to my friends, but also pouring into my dating relationship at the same time. If I want to make sure that I'm living a very luxurious life, but I also want to retire well before 65, well, then I'm going to have to learn what luxury looks like in small batches. Or I'm going to have to learn what it's like to splurge on the things that matter and maybe be a little bit more cost effective on things that I find not as important. Whatever it is for you, evaluate your costs so you know what you're signing up for, because the world only ever teaches you how to live in the or. There's tons of advice on how to be a mother, but there's very little advice on how to be a working mother. You know what I mean? And I think that's starting to change a little bit, but as a whole, not a whole ton much when it comes to resources. In the same way, there are very few resources on how to be a single woman navigating her career while trying to build a dating relationship. It's always one or the other. You very rarely find resources for both, or resources that facilitate the growth in the and the reason behind that is because the and is not made. Everybody can't handle the and. Very few people can actually handle the and. So understanding that cost is the first practical thing. The second practical thing is to simply make your choice and subsequently make choices that support your decision. So this is seen in verse 29. The farmer answers back to the servants and he says, no, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. So he simply made a decision. And the decision was, do not pull the harvest, or do not pull the weeds, because we don't want to tarnish our harvest. In the same way, when you go to make this decision to live in the and, you simply just make the decision. And then you ensure that your subsequent choices reflect that decision that you made. A lot of times I like to either verbalize or write down my decisions when it comes to the and, because while you're in the midst of those subsequent decisions, sometimes we get confused or we forget that all of it goes to one central thought, one central process. And so ensuring that you have that written down or verbally spoken somewhere with someone who can hold you accountable is definitely very helpful. So prime example, if I am saying that I want to coexist with someone who has offended me, and I'm saying I want to continue to live life even with them there, with the ultimate goal of striving towards healing, well, then that means the cost associated with it, like we talked about for number one, is that I'm going to have to swallow my pride and defy the way that I feel in an effort to stand up for what I believe is most healthy for me, and that is living in the and. But then after I make that choice, I verbalize that choice and I say, hey, I am choosing to do X, Y, and Z and to stay here, even if the relationship doesn't look the same, and continue to make choices accordingly. So even if that person continues to offend you, even if that person continues to do things to hurt you, you simply hold true to your boundaries, but also hold true to who you are. And this does not apply to abuse. But for situations that involve simply offense, Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Hopefully, we can learn some resilience in that. In the same way, another example is me choosing the job that I chose. If I want a job, if I want a family and a career, well, then me choosing a job that ensured that I had a healthy work-life balance was important. So even before I have the family, and even before I have the full career that I'm looking for, ensuring that I chose an entry-level position at a company that values work-life balance all the way up the food chain is so critical. So whatever that is for you, make your choice and subsequently make choices that support your big choice to live in the and. The last thing, which is supported by verse 30, is to have a plan on how to sustain you walking in the and. It says in verse 30, "At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." So he had a plan on what he was going to do long term, even though in the current state that he was in, he was just living with his decision of the and. And I think that's important. Like, if you know what it takes in order to sustain your choice to live in the and, you're making subsequent choices that support your decision to live in the and, well then sustaining that long term and getting to a space where you're operating in the and almost on autopilot will be a lot easier. So for me, when it comes to my plan to sustain working this dream job and having a family and asking God for all of these amazing things that I've asked him for and literally telling him I wanted it all, this is where I failed a little bit. I didn't have a plan to sustain it because I was so excited about the faith leap that I wasn't planning for when the excitement would wear off and the adversity would come. And now I'm in this place and I'm talking to you all today about this and trying to remind myself at the same time that the path that I've chosen is a faith path. And I need to have a solid, concrete plan to sustain myself long term. If I'm expecting to have a family and this dream job, well then to sustain myself as I'm beginning to work in balancing those two things, I need to have healthy boundaries for cutoff times for work. I need to have a healthy plan on how to actually pour into the relationships in my life and to begin dating. And to work those plans until I'm at a space where living in the and is almost simultaneous. Like those two things are almost simultaneous and they run on autopilot. Anywho, so I say all that to say, hopefully you all got something from today's conversation. I really hope that you guys are able to learn and to start seeing life from an and perspective from yourselves, and to not allow the world at large, social media, church members, social organizations, friend groups, or anything like that hinder you from living in the and seeing God and yourself and the life that you're living and building and growing in each of your areas of wellness from an and lens, where you can indeed have all that you've ever desired, all that you've ever strived for. You just got to put in a little bit of elbow grease to get it. So hopefully you guys can see the world from an and perspective, and hopefully you guys were blessed by this conversation. Thank you so much again for listening, and until the next podcast, bye.